Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing? And welcome. Welcome to this first conversation and this first exploration of self love. And the conversation for this particular video is, you know, what what is self love? What does it mean to be in a self love relationship with one's self? Um, If we haven't met yet, I'm Safia, and I am the Chief Shifter. I'm the CEO at New Habits. And New Habits is a coaching practice in which I work predominantly with professionals and also with business owners. And typically, the work we do is born from burnout and these inner glass ceilings that stop my clients from progressing. What I found very interesting in the work that I did that brought me to this place is that on paper, on the face of it, the people I work with are incredibly successful. Yet, despite their success, they have feelings of being tapped out. They have feelings of stagnation, and they have feelings of not doing something that really and truly matters to them. They talk about wanting more meaning in the work that they do. Over time, I've started to recognize, and it's very, very common, it's everywhere in popular spaces, whether you're on social media, whether you're reading actual journals, there are typical showstoppers that keep professionals from experiencing the greatness that lives within them. And more particularly, there are showstoppers that keep them from the feeling of the success that they have that is evidenced externally. These are typically perfectionism, which is really and truly my own personal Achilles heel. And perfectionism is well partnered with imposter syndrome and having an inner critic. And it all seems to play out against this backdrop of procrastination. And so that's pretty much the space in which these thoughts that I've been having about self-love has been percolating. I've been looking at, we all have strategies and tools with which to respond to each and every single one of these showstoppers. But systemically, one of the things that I've been thinking through over the past few months, both in reflection of the work that I've been doing with my clients and in my own experience, has been what is systemically missing from people who are ostensibly very successful, but they're just not feeling and experiencing that sense of success and having fulfillment. They've got great jobs and yet they feel unfulfilled and they're not necessarily feeling as though the work that they're doing is meaningful. And so the backdrop of my thoughts around self-love has been pretty much this. And there are a series of behaviors that I am working consistently to cultivate with myself and then to work with my clients. And so this has been an effort to codify what I think is a response to these showstoppers, a response to the sense of, I would say, alienation that my clients experience towards themselves. And that is this idea of self-love. I think of self-love and abundance in very much the same way. I think that both of these are things that exist naturally and normally in the world and inside of ourselves. But as we grow up and as we have life experiences and as we start experiencing our programming and being the subjects of our programming, I think we start creating barriers to self-love. We start creating barriers to abundance. And so what I'm offering in this series of conversations is perhaps tools or approaches and ideas we can use with ourselves as a response to these barriers. Nature hates a vacuum. So if we are getting rid of the barriers, what are we replacing it with? So very quickly, I want to share with you what I think the elements are of a self-love relationship. And then I will explore for this video what it means, what is needed to be able to to bring these elements, to bring these approaches to life. I want to repeat, as I said before, for me, this is a conversation, this is an exploration. I'm really hungry to hear your thoughts and your ideas. So this for me isn't a be-all and an end-all. I know that you can't codify something like self-love. I don't think that there's a universal definition of this is self-love, but I do think that we can have a decent approximation of what it is. And if we have that decent approximation of what it is, we can start building it and bringing it into our lives. So for me, the elements are essentially that you are in an actual relationship with ourselves. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about in this conversation. The second is, it's about having compassion for yourselves. For me, compassion is the gateway to the rest of the approaches. Then it's acceptance, coherence, sovereignty, and it's the ability to have reverence for ourselves. And it is about being able to bring our own luminosity into the world. So those for me are the approaches that are the elements or the things that we have to practice in order to experience self-love, in order to walk away or part ways with that alienation that we have from ourselves, and so that we can start living life more vitally. When I think of self-love, I think of the question, what would it be like if life were easier? What would it be like if we could experience more success calmly and with compassion for ourselves, with kindness for ourselves? And when I think of that question, I think of self-love. It seems to me to be the natural response to the question. Each and every single person I work with, each and every single experience I have is one of wanting more comfort and more ease in my life. And this is not about letting go of standards. This is not about letting go of success. This is not about letting go of material success. This is about having a new and different relationship with ourselves that doesn't take us to burnout, that doesn't take us to that self-alienation, that doesn't take us to being held hostage by our perfectionism, by our inner critic, by imposter syndrome, and by procrastination. This is about being able to move on in a way that allows us to experience the success we want with more ease, with more grace, and with more kindness. So what is a self-love relationship? Well, for starters, it's to be in an actual relationship with ourselves. So it would seem obvious that we are in a relationship with ourselves, but the truth is that the more and more distracted we are, the less and less we are in a relationship with ourselves. The more distracted we are, and let's face it, we live in a world that is designed to distract us from ourselves. We live in a world that is designed to take our attention anywhere and everywhere but towards ourselves. We were also raised to believe things like the devil finds work for idle hands, stop daydreaming. We were born to believe that we've got to stay busy, we've got to stay moving, right? Now, the truth is that when you are in a relationship with someone, the one thing that you want to do is you want to invest your time with that person. You want to spend on that person what you have, whether it is your cooking skills, whether it is whatever skill that you or gift or contribution or whatever it is that you have, you want to bring it to that relationship. You want to be with that person, and you want to gift that person that part of you. It's no different when we're in a relationship with ourselves. We need to have time with ourselves. We need to be able to hold space for ourselves in solitude. We need to be able to bring our gifts, the gifts that we were also happy to give to others. We need to be able to bring those gifts to ourselves and to visit them upon ourselves. We need to be able to be in a self-loving relationship. We need to be in a relationship with ourselves. And so we need to honor ourselves with what we have. It's not about putting your focus and your attention about what you can't give yourself. It's about putting your focus and your attention on what you can offer yourself. And the one thing we can all give ourselves is time, focus, and attention. These are the most valuable things in the world: time, focus, and attention. And so if you want to evaluate whether or not you are in a relationship with yourself, have a look in your life and to see how much appetite you actually have for solitude. How much appetite do you actually have for having conversations with yourself? How much appetite do you actually have for just being, without being performative? Is that available to you? Do you have the capacity to extend that to yourself? Or are you always reaching for a phone or a chore or a task or an email or something? Because goodness knows there's always something. Before there was technology, there was keeping yourself busy, I know people who never ever sit still. Why? Because being with your own thoughts is overbearing and overwhelming. So can you be with your own thoughts? The second very important element of self-love for me is answering the question, are you willing? Now, are you willing is one of the most important questions I think we can ask ourselves ever. It's not, do you know how? It's not, when will you do it? Or anything like that. It's just, are you willing? And are you willing is a very complex question. Are you willing is a question that takes us to many, many different places inside of ourselves. Now, are you willing is not the same as, do you want to? Because you might not want to, but are you willing to? And are you willing to sit with yourself? Are you willing to sit with those thoughts that make you feel feelings of shame, feelings of guilt, feelings of disappointment, feelings of not mastering up to whatever standard is that you have? Are you willing to sit with the things that have brought you trauma? Are you willing to sit with the things that make you feel as if you've been in turmoil, as if you are going to continue that turmoil by being with it? Now, our natural response is to recoil from anything that looks and feels like vulnerability. And so the question when you ask, are you willing, is a very challenging question, and the answer might differ from experience to experience. What is so important is just that you're willing, and that you're willing to be with yourself on the journey without any expectation of the result of the journey, without any expectation of how it's going to turn out, just being present to yourself. And the quality of that willingness is to be willing to be with yourself, almost as if you're a distant bird soaring high above yourself, dispassionate, just curious, just interested, just looking, not judging, not evaluating, not analyzing, just being. The funny thing about the emotions that we resist, the funny thing about the very things that keep us away from being vulnerable, is that when we give space to them, they are pretty much able to dissipate very often by themselves. Yes, absolutely, sometimes you do need support, you do need help. But very often, the things that we think are going to hold us back, these things, these feelings, they dissipate normally if you just allow them to surface. So are you willing to allow things that gives you discomfort to surface? The other aspect of willing, which I sometimes think is a bigger aspect, is, are you willing not only to be in the vulnerability of your shadows, but are you willing to be in the vulnerability of your light? Now, very often, in my experience, more people are held hostage by their resistance to their own light. They find reasons, and this is where perfectionism and procrastination and all these beautiful showstoppers come up to play with us. This is where they come to interfere. These are the barriers that we erect to interfere with our ability to bring our light to the world. And so are you willing to make the space to be on that journey, to not know how it's going to turn out, and to play in your own light? Are you willing to do that and to see where it takes you? Now, for me, this quality of willingness is about stepping away from judgment. I talk more about that in the later sessions, more specifically compassion and acceptance. But judgment tends to be the biggest barrier between ourselves and self-love. And so if we are able to play in our willingness, it means we are able to suspend our judgment. We are able to suspend for that moment our programming. Being willing means I'm willing to explore this, in spite of all the programming I have, in spite of all the things I believe about the situation, in spite of all the notions that I have about how this thing should be. I'm willing to play with this idea and see where it takes me. This leads me to another big part of the conversation. When we spoke about things like potential and growth and expansion, maybe 10 years ago, the language would typically be self-esteem, self-confidence, self-belief. And are these things relevant in the conversation about self-love? I think it really is. But there's a big distinction for me. So I think about my own journey. I've been on a huge, huge journey over many years, and there's been a lot of personal development and a lot of growth. But I can't say that I've ever been in a relationship with myself where I'm just like, loving myself like crazy, where I'm endorsing myself, where I'm celebrating myself, where I'm just like my biggest cheerleader. I can't say that. And yet, if I think back, I've always presented with very good self-esteem. I've always presented with good self-confidence. And for the most part, I feel like I have got a lot of self-esteem, high self-esteem. For the most part, I really and truly do feel like I have confidence. I do feel like I can catch myself if I fall. But I don't have that element of enjoying myself necessarily as much as I have the self-esteem and the self-confidence. And for me, that is kind of where self-love comes to fill in the gaps. It's that lubricant that makes it all work a lot more smoothly. So it depends on the energy with which you bring your esteem and with which you bring your energy. There are two big energies in the world. That's four. So two big energies in the world. The first energy is the energy of love, and the other is the energy of fear. So the energy of fear is not necessarily I'm shaking in my boots fear, but it is that reluctance to be with feelings and emotions and sensations in our body that give us discomfort. Unwanted feelings. So very often when I'm able to accomplish many things with my self-esteem and with my confidence, there is this energy that pushes it, that is from this energy of fear. I push my motivation that I use to push through things is comparison. I use my inner critic to goad myself into accomplishing things. So even things that I enjoy doing, I have judgment of myself when I'm doing it. And so that takes away from the enjoyment. It's about getting it correct, getting it right, being performatively acceptable at whatever standard my unicorn mind might sometimes create. And so that driven performance has got a distortion in it because so much of that performance is about me, myself. I distort my identity and what I do. And this is what I see in my clients as well. So there's this distortion between who you are, what you do, and what you have, and what you accomplish. Self-love, a loving perspective on esteem and confidence, is not like driven performance. It's much simpler. So driven performance, because so much is on the line, is very complicated and very anxiety-driven and very chaotic and very overwhelming and very boom, 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 boom. Whereas when you approach the same tasks from a place of curiosity and interest, and let's see where it falls out. And you know what? If it succeeds, it doesn't really shape who I am. It's not who I am. It might influence, the direction I go in, but my value, my worth as a human being isn't contingent on it. And when I succeed, it's something that I can celebrate and reminisce on in time to come. And, but it doesn't mean that I'm more human because I've achieved and accomplished it. It is separate from who I am as a person. Who I am as a person is a complete state, it's complete element, it's complete unit. It doesn't need performance to complete it. So those are two very different energies with which to approach self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-belief. And so I think it's part of the self-love conversation, but as I said earlier on, self-love is the lubricant that makes it all work so much smoother, and that makes it possible for us to have that ease and that grace and that kindness on our journey of accomplishing many, many things. The funny thing is that when we step into self-love, when we start removing those barriers and we replace it with compassion, with acceptance, with luminosity, with our own sovereignty, with our coherence, with our reverence, when we are on a self-love journey doing that, the most fascinating thing is that we are able to accomplish successes that we wouldn't even imagine. And the reason why we can do that is because we haven't put ourselves on the line. We've got our own back. We are there to catch ourselves. And so for me, this thing about self-love, I've shared with you in this video, this relationship, this willingness, that's the container. That's the container that we create for ourselves. That space to move, that space to just expand, that roominess. And anything that is not self-love, that has got judgment in it, is constricting. It takes away from the willingness. It makes the relationship less safe and less comfortable. So that's my contribution to the conversation for this session. I hope that I will hear from you, your thoughts, your ideas, and I hope that you'll join me for the next iteration of the conversation. This was fun. Bye for now.